And last but not least, we move to Northern Ireland. And Professor Ian Young is Professor of Medicine at Queen's University, Belfast, and he's also the Chief Scientific Advisor to the Northern Ireland Department of Health and Director of Research for Health and Social Care, Northern Ireland. So Ian is going to tell us about the situation in Northern Ireland.
So thank you very much to the organisers for the invitation. I first met Munir and indeed Ron van Schaik, who was speaking earlier. Ron was reminding me back in 2005 at an international Federation for Clinical Chemistry Laboratory Medicine working group meeting on pharmacogenomics. It strikes me as interesting that many of the problems and issues we discussed at that meeting remain unresolved now, 18 years later, although at least I think there are some evidence of distinct progress across the UK and the science. I'm speaking primarily from a policy perspective today in relation to my government role. What I thought would be useful is to give you a brief introduction to Northern Ireland, and then talk a bit about background and policy context, current practice, and future implementation in terms of pharmacogenomics. I'm always interested when I attend UK meetings, as I often do, how little many people know about Northern Ireland. Can I ask for a show of hands if you've been to Northern Ireland? I'm delighted to see that. And this is therefore a particularly well-informed audience, I hope. If you haven't been, it's an absolutely fantastic place to visit. One of the UK's leading destinations for short breaks in particular. Game of Thrones, Giant's Causeway, the Titanic Museum, all great. So please, if you're not sure where you're going on your holidays, then I've now provided a solution. Population of Northern Ireland is 1.9 million, which is about 3% of the UK population. And in many ways, and in terms of pharmacogenomics, I think, and healthcare delivery more generally, there's a sense in which small is beautiful. We're a place where it's relatively easy to coordinate things and to have a centralized, agreed approach. That's not to say that Northern Ireland is without its problems, as you know, and obviously those include political challenges and at the moment absence of ministers. There are 5 health and social care trusts, and in addition to that we have a single public health agency and a business services organisation. 2 universities, and I know there are delegates from both of our universities here today and that reflects the interest, the academic interest in pharmacogenomics in Northern Ireland. And of course, uniquely in the UK, we have a land border with an EU country, an open and transparent, seamless land border, which people and goods go across every day without noticing the difference, apart from some changes in the road signs, and the fact that you move from a country with 3 languages to one with 2 languages. So who knew that Northern Ireland had 3 languages? Put your hand up if that's the case. Well, see, now you don't know quite as much as you thought. And down in the bottom right, you'll see the official logo of the Department of Health with the 3 languages represented. You're now saying, what's the third one? What's the third? So the three languages which have recognition are English, of course, Irish, and the third one is Ulster Scots, which I can speak, oddly enough, but many of you would probably not recognize as a distinct language. In terms of our genomics services, we have a centralized regional molecular diagnostics service, RMDS, based in Belfast Health and Social Care Trust, and it provides the full range of services that you would expect across medical microbiology, transplant matching, cancers, both hematological and solid tumor, rare diseases, etc. We participated in the 100,000 Genomes project, and that, in a sense, was our lead-in, I think, in terms of access and use of whole genome sequencing. And we particularly focused there on rare diseases and solid tumors, and our molecular genetics service is strongest in those areas. We're doing a little bit of work in pharmacogenomics, which I'll describe for you, also our future intentions, and then thinking about polygenic risk scores. In terms of strategic context, our Department of Health Minister endorsed the Genome UK strategy in 2020 and signed up to the shared commitments for UK-wide implementation from 2022 to 25, of which one of the key ones has to be established formally a genomics partnership within Northern Ireland. That has been somewhat held up in terms of the political changes in Northern Ireland, but we have done our best to progress the underlying recommendations. The partnership will include health and social care, public health, and then industry, research and academia, along with patient input to decide on our best strategic approach and how we will embed and deliver these services. We have a number of key departmental strategies which we have agreed to prioritize in terms of genomic medicine. The first is our rare diseases action plan. So offering appropriate testing for rare disease diagnosis and investigation is core to what we do, either whole genome sequencing or other types of testing, depending on the indication. Secondly, we have a cancer strategy which contains a significant number of commitments around how we will use genomic testing, including whole genome sequencing in the context of incident cancers and management of patients with cancers, and that is a priority area. And thirdly, we've been thinking hard about how we intend to embed and use the data which derives from genomic medicine and attach it to our electronic healthcare record. Northern Ireland is moving later this year to a new electronic health and social care record in a program called Encompass. That will be a single record containing health and care data, which all Northern Ireland citizens, unless they choose to opt out, will be involved in. That record will be available to everybody within Northern Ireland and therefore provides a mechanism by which genomic data, once it becomes part of the record, can be accessible at point of care to whichever clinician is looking to make a decision or delivering services to a patient. And I think our longer term ambition is that we'll end in a position not where there's a question about what pharmacogenetic test I should do, but the question should be, what pharmacogenetic question am I asking? And the data will already exist in the record and will be available, accessible, and will come with appropriate interpretation so that a clinician can utilize the data in relation to the question that they are seeking to ask. Now, that is a longer term aspiration and position, and clearly there's a journey between where we are now and where we should be then, and there are a number of intermediate stages which are likely to be important. In November 22, which was just before we lost government, we lost our minister as a result of the collapse of Northern Ireland government. There was a ministerial statement issued around intent in relation to genomics, and that provides the framework in which officials can continue to operate ahead of our restoration of government. And in particular, that commitment was to establish the Genomics Partnership, to which I referred to earlier, and for sustained investment in our genomics workforce, IT, and infrastructure, something which I know everybody was delighted to see, but the mechanics of that in a very challenging financial environment, when as yet we don't have a budget for this year, is difficult. Now, our regional molecular diagnostics service uses next generation sequencing, whole exome sequencing, targeted panel testing in a range of settings, as you would largely expect, and delivers that particularly for solid tumors, targeted cancers, and then in the rare disease service in particular, we use whole exome testing predominantly, with some send-away testing for whole genome sequencing. The data, which is a key element to it, is currently stored in a cloud solution in terms of analysis, interpretation, and storage. The intention is to link that into the new electronic health and care record with interpretation attached. Now, in terms specifically of pharmacogenomic testing, like everybody else, we've rolled out DPYD testing prior to fluoropyrimidine treatment. And I'm not going to talk any more about that. I think the fact that we've all referred to it is a good indication of four-nation collaboration and working together. One of the high-level principles that we're trying to operate to is to ensure for our clinicians and population equity of access to genomic testing to what is available across the other countries. Health is devolved, but there's no doubt that there's an expectation at a population level that people will have access to similar quality and range of services. And for example, we know from experience where a test for a rare disease is available on the England directory, and if it were not to be available to the Northern Ireland population, that we would hear about that, and our politicians would hear about that fairly rapidly via the type of patient interest groups which benefit patients and help them to share information. So it's important to us that we maintain that equity of access, and DPYD testing has rolled out as part of that. That, of course, is to avoid adverse events. There's also a whole range of testing which we offer to facilitate treatment, targeted treatments across a range of disease areas, and this is ever growing. In Northern Ireland in particular, we were very heavily involved in the cystic fibrosis trials. Cystic fibrosis is a common condition on the Celtic fringes of the UK, and more common among the Northern Ireland population than elsewhere. And Professor Stuart Elborn and others in Belfast led some of those trials that established the genomic basis for the use of ivacaftor and Orkambi, for example. And there are a range of other indications there where delivery of treatment is dependent on testing, pharmacogenomic testing. Limitations in technologies delivering pharmacogenomics. At present, we're, I think, too much reliant on specific pharmacogenomic tests, and we need to offer broader tests to embed them in the healthcare record and then have the data available at the point where a question is asked. And that will be for us the direction of travel towards multiple targets in a single assay, with the results being embedded in the record and subsequently interrogated. And those really are our ambitions in this space, to provide access to testing for the same range of indications as available elsewhere in the UK and Ireland, who are also a key partner for us, where it's evidence-based and both effective and cost-effective. Secondly, to support research and pilot studies where there is an evidence gap, and both of our local universities are interested in that. I know colleagues from Ulster University are here, and in particular are hoping to carry out a programme of work in Donegal, Northern Ireland and Scotland, looking at pain antidepressant and statin treatment and how pharmacogenomic testing can be embedded for those indications, and long-term to have profiles as part of our electronic healthcare record. Ultimately, I expect that we'll move to a position when all of our population will be offered comprehensive genomic testing at some point in their life. And if they consent to that and for use of that information in relation to delivery of their care, that it will be there in their record with appropriate interpretation, probably largely AI-driven in due course. And when a clinician asks a question of the record, they will receive a useful response that an educated clinician with appropriate skill can use to inform their decision making. Finally, just a couple of comments in terms of what I think are the big challenges. Firstly, the strength of the evidence. There's lots of evidence around pharmacogenomic testing, but only a few examples where things have been tested consistently and shown to be beneficial in a fairly wide range of healthcare population settings, different ethnic groups, and to be practical. So we need more of that. We need to consider cost effectiveness as well, and I know that's been touched on, and I'm not going to say any more about it. The results need to be available with interpretation in real time in a way that clinicians can use. And that is a big challenge for the future. And then cost and capacity in the system. They need to be available in a way that clinicians think help them and ease their workflow, rather than clinicians seeing this as an additional job which will take more of their time and responsibility. Thank you very much.